Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'm going to get right to business this morning. We're going to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Global Vatican. The Global Vatican. You heard about a global government, a global religion, a global economic and social system? Well, we're learning about it from a Roman Catholic, a very prestigious Roman Catholic, a former U.S. ambassador to the so-called Holy See. His name's Francis Rooney, and he wrote this book. It's an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. You can read about it in Revelation chapter 13. The first beast being the woman of Revelation 17, and the beast that carries her. That would be the governments of the world. Now we'll continue in chapter 2 of this book entitled Pio Nono and the Turning Point. This is Pope Pius IX and his abrupt turning point from liberal ideas to conservative ideas. All right, Pope Pius IX, initially in his papacy, was considered a liberal. Caused him a great deal of problems, and he did an about-face. So much for the infallible popes, right? We'll begin in part 2 of chapter 2. Just a few sentences, backtracking a bit for continuity. He says, oh, by the way, we're on page 45 if you're following along in your own copy of the book. He says the United States was immune to the United States was not immune to the excitement surrounding the new Pope. Given their own positive experience with democracy and independence, Americans generally supported the Pope's transformations and his apparent embrace of liberal ideas. Liberal ideas meaning departure from rigid enforcement of Roman Catholic canon law, which stated that the people are to be governed. The people are not to govern. The people are not to be the government. That there are two classes, the ruling class and the ruled class. That's Roman Catholic canon law. And this Pope seemed to be adopting liberal ideas, meaning, well, he had some feeling for those people and governments that wanted to rule themselves. All right, people in the government. And it says Pius IX's greatest fans included prominent American Protestants. Okay, greatest fan of the Antichrist, Protestants, prominent American Protestants, whose ancestors had been despised, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this morning. Prominent American Protestants whose ancestors had despised all things papist or Romish. Why? I will add, because they knew what Protestants know. The papacy's the Antichrist. The Bible clearly identifies the papacy, can't be mistaken for anyone else, and history literally confirms what the Bible says. Now, Charles Edwards Lester, author and ordained Presbyterian minister and grandson of Calvinist preacher John Edwards, declared Pius, quote, listen to this from a Protestant minister, declared Pius, quote, the man heaven seemed to have chosen to lead the human race out of the house of bondage, unquote. This wayward Calvinist preacher declared the papacy the modern day Moses. Now, we know who our Moses was. The Jews had their Moses. The Protestants, the Christians, true Christians, have Jesus. Jesus is our Moses. He led us out of the bondage of sin. And to insinuate any man into that position is blasphemy. But not only that, this man, supposedly a Protestant, reveres this Pope as one who would lead the human race out of the house of bondage. Now, you can't get more biblically, historically, and prophetically ignorant than that. I know that sounds harsh to people who've never heard the Protestant message before. But when you begin to comprehend Protestantism and what it believes and what it teaches, and that it is true Christianity, first loyalty to Christ and dependent upon him as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and rejecting all other self-styled authorities in the world, you must perceive the papacy and his arrogant role in history as the man of sin, the counterfeit Christ. That's what Antichrist means. Now he continues, he says, New York Tribune correspondent Margaret Fuller wrote from Rome to herald the new pope as, quote, a man of noble and good aspect, who has set his heart on doing something solid for the benefit of man, unquote. While her celebrated editor, Horace Greeley, joined thousands of New Yorkers at the Broadway Tabernacle to pay tribute to the Pope's, quote, enlightened policy and liberal measures, unquote. A laudatory letter from Secretary of State and future President James Buchanan was read aloud at the Tabernacle, along with letters from former President Martin Van Buren and other dignitaries. In the midst of all this good feeling, Secretary Buchanan received a letter from Nicholas Brown, the American consul to Rome. That's right. America had already had a consul to Rome and had had several prior to this time. It says the letter was dated June 1st, 1847. Here's what he says, quote, you may recollect that some time since I informed you that on several occasions persons holding high official stations in the papal government had expressed to me a desire that diplomatic relations might be established between the United States and the papal government on a footing similar to those that exist between papal states and countries where the Romish religion, that is the Roman Catholic Church, is not the prevalent sect. Okay. So this is a recommendation to open formal diplomatic relations between the United States, supposedly a Protestant nation that protested Antichrist, and the man of sin, the little horn of Daniel, the son of perdition, the one who exalts himself above the stars of God, wishes to sit upon the mount of the congregation in the side of the north, right? You know I'm mixing two passages, one from the Old Testament and one from the New. That's very observant of you, but it's speaking of the same man. Okay? Satan and Satan's man on the earth, the papacy. Okay? Calls himself the vicar of Christ to deceive the world, and most of the world is deceived. And particularly these Protestants, these early Protestants in American history, completely deceived. Now he says this was not the first time relations between the United States and the Holy See had been discussed. Indeed, America had intermittently employed consuls to the Pope since 1797. 1797, the American government, the American federal government, which was largely established by the Karl family, signers of the Declaration of Independence, the first Roman Catholic bishop, the builder of the first Jesuit university, Georgetown University, which produces all of the politicians in Washington, and Daniel Karl, who donated the land for the Capitol building. The United States government, that is the federal government, had been exchanging consuls with the Pope since 1797. I wonder what the Protestants, the real true Protestants, had to say about that. The author really doesn't detail that too much. Anyway, he says these men worked essentially as freelance business agents. In other words, to prevent Protestant acrimony, they chose, well, people from the private sector to be the U.S. government's representatives. You ever heard of private-public partnerships? Well, this was the first one. And they were freelance business agents overseeing minor American trade with the Papal States. Now, after reading Brown's letter, Secretary Buchanan approached President James K. Polk with a proposal to formalize relations with the Papal States and send a charge d'affaires to the Holy See. The charge would not have the status of a full-fledged ambassador, but he would be a de jure representative of the U.S. government. A big step up from a mere consul. So, you know, while this author is telling us that all of these excitable Protestants worrying about the influx of Roman Catholic Irishmen and Roman Catholic Germans immigrating to this country in an attempt to make America Catholic, well, that's just all nonsense. That's just all anti-Roman Catholic rhetoric. But here now he's telling you the American government has made formal diplomatic relations with the papacy. It's kind of in your face, isn't it? On the one hand, make the Protestant accusation laughable and discredit it, and then turn right around on the next page and confirm their suspicions and fears were justified. Of course, he knows that most Americans don't read books at all. They watch videos. And secondly, when they do read a book, they don't read it critically. They don't do the math as they read, and they're never going to catch this admission. But it's an admission. Okay? Influx of Roman Catholics, more and more power of Catholics in Washington, D.C. All of a sudden somebody suggests, hey, we're doing business with the Papal States. Why don't we send a consul? Why don't we send a consul to the Holy See? Well, that worked out so good. Let's have a charge d'affaires, a de jure representative of the American government. And now we have full-fledged, and have had for a long, long time now, full-fledged ambassadors to the Holy See. And don't you know, they keep lines of communication open between our government and this man of sin. And no one who speaks against this is regarded as someone championing the Constitution or someone championing Protestantism. No, he's discredited as an anti-Roman Catholic bigot. Okay? It's politically incorrect to speak this way about the papacy and about the Holy See. But we're just getting started with this book. There's a whole lot more coming. All right? On December 7th, 1847, in his third annual message, he informed Congress that, quote, interesting political events, unquote, in the Papal States, as well as, quote, a just regard to our commercial interests, unquote, He wouldn't dare say religious interests, would he? Made an appointment of the charge d'affaires to the Holy See, highly expedient, quote unquote, highly expedient. Okay, expediency driving this new appointment. Isn't that really expedient that the United States have a official or unofficial representative to the Holy See, to the man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist? Should we ally ourselves with that man of sin on a mere expedient? Well, this so-called Protestant country did back in 1847. Now, inevitably, perhaps, says the author, the debate in Congress over funding a legation to the Papal States became mired in anti-Catholic rhetoric. Leading the opposition was Representative Lewis E. Levin, a know-nothing from Pennsylvania, who made a career of dividing Protestants and Catholics. He must have been a Protestant, right? It said on March 8th, 1848, the House of Representatives, in the House of Representatives, Levin gave a long speech attacking the Catholic Church with insinuation and innuendo, says this author. I wish I could see those accusations and confirm them in history and then tell you exactly what he's referencing here. But suffice it to say, whenever the truth comes out about the history of the Roman Catholic Church and their political dealings with all the nations of the world, Rome always responds with, oh, these are just insinuations and innuendo. And then turn right around the next breath, confirm those insinuations and innuendo, just like this author's doing. Now, his point seemed to be that placing a legation in Rome would aid the Church's supposed scheme to seize control of the United States by sending hordes of Irish Roman Catholics to U.S. shores. Although the United States Constitution might stand in the way of Catholics establishing a theocracy on the federal level, Levin warned that nothing prevented individual states, that is, individual states, from succumbing one by one to the Catholic conspiracy. Okay? Let me comment here. While Levin is saying it is highly unlikely under the Constitution for the Vatican to get complete control of the federal government, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that they could get control of the individual states and by that method make America Catholic. Now, let me tell you something. I've had some listeners call me and write me and say, my state's thinking about seceding from the Union. We're going to be sovereign and independent. We're going to throw off this yoke of bondage from Washington, D.C. And I tell them, well, that all sounds well and good, but let me tell you something. The same beast that rules Washington, D.C. has branch offices in every neighborhood of every city in your state. They already control your state government, too. So if you divorce yourself from the federal government, you're left with its entire mechanism residing right there in your state, and not a thing will change. The papacy rules Washington, D.C., and Roman Catholics and bishops and Jesuits run every state house. Roman Catholic churches are the intelligence gathering operation. The priesthood are the Roman Catholic hierarchy, the shadow government that controls politics in every area of this country. And if you think divorcing yourself from the federal government and declaring sovereignty, states' rights, is going to isolate you from this beast, you've got another thing coming. You need to read Avro Manhattan's book, The Vatican Billions. You need to just walk the halls of your state government and discover which one are Jesuit priests, which ones are in positions that are appointed and not elected, And you'll find Jesuit priests running your state. And you'll find bishops distributed all throughout the state in their jurisdictions, all watching over you like a hawk. And they control politics. The most powerful man in every location is the local bishop. They run the courthouses. They run the courts. They run the justice system. They run it all. And they oversee it all. And if there's any Protestant activity, it's quickly squelched. That's already in place. Okay? Rome set out to control this nation lock, stock, and barrel from Washington right down through to your local school board. And they've succeeded because Protestants went to sleep. Protestants tried to preserve their own names by not being, quote-unquote, anti-Roman Catholic bigots. They didn't want to be called nasty names. So now Rome rules the roost. It's a sad state of affairs. But we don't have to remain silent about it anymore. When conditions in this country get so bad, and they soon will, they already are, but people don't recognize it. When the tyranny becomes so noticeable and overwhelming and oppressing in this life, in this nation, people aren't going to care to be called an anti-Roman Catholic bigot and might just find the scriptural, prophetic, historical, and intestinal fortitude to stand up and call a spade and name the enemy, the greatest of enemies to be feared in any nation, the man of sin and his hordes. Would to God that day was tomorrow. But for that ever to happen, we have to give up the falsehood, the Jesuit falsehood called futurism. The Antichrist is the papacy, always has been the papacy, always will be the papacy. And if you were looking for a future one, you have been blinded. Completely blinded as to what's going on in your nation right before your eyes. So, people might be getting kind of tired of me talking about futurism all the time. I talk about it on every broadcast, but it's the key. It's the very key that keeps us ignorant and apathetic. Now, every one of you would just be out of your skin if, a Muslim were to occupy the White House. And many say Barack Obama is a Muslim. Well, he plays a Muslim really well, but he answers to the man of sin in Rome. Trust me. Do your own investigation. Look how he handled himself when he went to the... Ask yourself, why would a Muslim president of the United States care to jump on the old nag out at Edwards Air Force Base, kick her in the flanks, and trot off to Rome wearing black and veils and kissing his ring? The president of the United States? You got to be kidding me. And it isn't just Barack Obama. They all do it. Kissing the ring of the Pope. They keep telling us, our mission to the Vatican is only diplomatic, has nothing to do with religion. The United States Constitution prevents us from dealing in religion. So why does the president wear black? Why doesn't he wear a suit and tie like everybody else? Navy blue, mixing red and white and blue? No, black. Okay? And if his wife attends, she's got to wear a black veil. And they both have to call him Holy Father. And they both have to kiss his ring. Diplomatic mission, my eye. And the whole world believes this garbage. Americans believe this garbage. And while they think there's a Muslim in the White House, the greatest of all enemies to be feared, occupies the White House, and he's not a Muslim. We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. If you would like to see Inquisition Update continue on First Amendment Radio, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. www.firstamendmentradio.com, and make a contribution, a prayerful, taxed contribution, and join those who love the truth. Love the truth like you won't likely hear anywhere else. First Amendment Radio. And if you wish to contact me, the host, Tom Fress, simply send me an email, tom@seawaves.us. Tom@seawaves, like the waves of the sea, tom@seawaves.us. Now, former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See tells us, inevitably perhaps, the debate in Congress over funding a legation to the Papal States became mired in anti-Catholic rhetoric. Anti-Catholic rhetoric. Doesn't that sound ugly? It's meant to sound ugly. Facts are meant to sound ugly, especially when they're facts exposing the history of the Roman Catholic Church. Leading the opposition was Representative Louis E. Levin, a know-nothing from Pennsylvania, who made a career of dividing Protestants and Catholics. See, we're supposed to unite Protestants and Catholics. After all, the Muslims are going to rule the world in 50 years. They breed like mice. And, of course, Christians kill their babies or wear, preventive measures, take preventive measures not to get pregnant. The Muslims are going to rule the world in 50 years. We just simply must unite all Christians. You know what's wrong with that? The Roman Catholic Church is not the Christian church. It is the church of Antichrist, the synagogue of Satan. And so they put up the fear of a Muslim caliphate coming to the United States of America to unite Protestants, ignorant, apostate, Protestants in name only, back to the Roman Catholic Church in order to stave off this Muslim caliphate, this global Muslim caliphate, when in fact the papacy already rules the world. You can't get more blind than that. Failure to read and understand the scriptures, the prophecies, and see their fulfillment in history, and allowing Jesuitized Protestant pastors to come and teach you a load of malarkey called futurism to blind you even further is the reason why we're totally in a police state, a Roman Catholic police state. But there was an outcry from this representative, Louis E. Levin, a know-nothing from Pennsylvania, who made a career of dividing Protestants and Catholics. See, he wasn't ecumenical. No, he wasn't ecumenical. He wasn't uniting with any Catholic, pope or priest or parishioner. Okay? He said on March 8th, 1848, in the House of Representatives, Levin gave a long speech attacking the Catholic Church with, says the author, insinuation and innuendo. His point seemed to be that placing a legation in Rome, that is, a United States legate or representative to Rome, would aid the Roman Catholic Church's supposed scheme to seize control of the United States by sending hordes of Irish Catholics to United States shores. In other words, it would legitimate the Pope, strengthen the Pope in the United States, and even open the gates of Roman Catholic immigration wide open. Okay, this anti-Roman Catholic bigot, Levin, in Congress was was warning, you send a legate to the Pope, it's going to open the doors to all kinds of Roman Catholics immigrate to this country. They're going to take over the government, and they're going to oppress Protestants, just like they've always done throughout history. Inarguably, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't even argue that point. Okay? Sounds like a sound and solid warning to me. Not anti-Roman Catholic bigotry, not insinuation and innuendo. Fact. Prophetic and historic fact. His point seemed to be that placing a legation in Rome would aid the Church's supposed scheme to seize control of the United States by sending hordes of Irish Roman Catholics to U.S. shores. Although the United States Constitution might stand in the way of Catholics establishing a theocracy, that is, a popocracy, on the federal level, Levin warned that nothing preventing individual states from succumbing one by one to the Catholic conspiracy. Quote, "This, sir, in itself explains the secret of this extraordinary flood of Roman Catholic population now pouring into our country," unquote. As for who is behind the plot, Levin blamed dark forces in the Catholic hierarchy, especially the Jesuits. I wish Levin would have run for president back then. Anyway, I wish Levin would run for president today, huh? All right, another representative from Pennsylvania, C.J. Ingersoll, rose to scold Levin. He suggested that his fellow congressman accompany him across town to Georgetown College and dine with some actual Jesuits, whom he might discover to be good, patriotic, and freedom-loving men. Levin thanked Ingersoll for the invitation, but declined. He was suffering from dyspepsia. He announced on the White House floor, or on the House floor, quote, "Suppose I go and should be seized with one of those unfortunate attacks of cramp and should die. Nothing would satisfy my constituents that I had not been poisoned by the Jesuits," unquote. Sounds to me like this man had done his homework and had studied the history of the Jesuits and how one of their most lethal and most effective weapons throughout their history has been poison. They've even used it on American presidents. Just read the book, The Secret Terrorist by Bill Hughes, and also The Enemy Unmasked by Bill Hughes, and other books that we've read right here on Inquisition Update. Presidential assassination by poisoning. It's a calling card of the Jesuits. That's why their insignia, you know, everybody's got a logo these days. The Jesuits have had one. It's a skull and crossbones. You see it on every bottle of poison. It's an open acknowledgement that poison is the best weapon the Jesuits have if they want to get rid of somebody real quick. Poison. You think I'm making this up? It's the truth. Now, in the end, Ingersoll and others won the argument with an appeal to the common sense and American ideals. The legation, the legation would cost taxpayers a mere $9,000 and would reward them with a small but potentially lucrative trade with the Papal States in cotton, sugar, and tobacco. Not incidentally, the American presence would be fortuitous at a time when the Pope was introducing reforms. As another Pennsylvania Congressman, Representative Brown, put it that day, quote, "Did not the American heart beat in unison with that of Pope Pius in his efforts for the amelioration of the condition of the Italians," unquote? Amelioration of the condition of the Italians? The papacy? We're going to hear the truth. If you just stay tuned, we're going to tell the truth. It says, the American heart apparently did An amendment to strike the papal legation from an appropriations bill was easily defeated, 137 to 15 in the House and 36 to 7 in the Senate. Funding was approved. Secretary Buchanan nominated Jacob L. Martin to fill the post. Though not well known today, Jacob Martin was a man of considerable reputation and influence in the mid-19th century America. He served in numerous capacities in the State Department. For 2 days, he's been well groomed. State Department, it's almost always occupied by a papist. It is today, John F. Kerry and Hillary Clinton. Okay? It says for 2 days, 1841, for 2 days in 1841, he even filled in as interim Secretary of State. You see? And it says a Catholic convert from North Carolina, Martin spent much of his adult life abroad, including the previous 4 years with the American legation in Paris. So he's being groomed for the job. And it says, in addition to his work as a diplomat, Martin had earned minor literary fame. In 1871, an anthology entitled Choice Specimens of American Literature includes his poem, The Church of Santa Croce, Florence. Here's how it goes. Tomb of the mighty dead, illustrious shrine, when genius, in the majesty of death, poses solemn, sepulchred beneath, unquote. And so on. A gloomy poem which unfortunately set the stage for what happened to Jacob Martin when he arrived in Rome the following August. For the moment, though, in that still hopeful April 1848, no hint of ill fortune was apparent. Expecting only success, Secretary Buchanan sent Martin his official instructions. Buchanan made clear that the mission to the Holy See was limited in scope as dictated by the U.S. Constitution. Okay, here's where we're going to make a distinction again between church and state, and it's just hogwash. All right, he says, quote, there's one consideration which you ought always to keep in view in your intercourse with papal authorities. Most, if not all, the governments of which diplomatic representatives at Rome are connected with the Pope as the head of the Catholic Church. In this respect, the government of the United States occupies an entirely different position. It possesses no power whatever over the question of religion. So, when you're going to deal with the papacy, since you're an American and our Constitution forbids the establishment of religion, you deal with the papacy strictly on a diplomatic level. Never on a religious. Okay? You got to keep up the pretense. They don't have to keep up the pretense anymore. Like I said before, all of our presidents go to meet the papacy wearing black and veils for their wives. They call him Holy Father, not primate of the Roman state, of Vatican City. No, Holy Father, Your Eminence, and they bow and kiss his ring. If this were a Protestant nation, the country would be in outrage. If this were a Protestant nation, no representative of our government would ever be allowed to set foot in Vatican City unless it was a notice to the Pope. We know who you are. We know who you are in the Bible. We know who you are in history. And we are your lethal mortal enemies, spiritually and temporally. And you have no legal jurisdiction, no lawful jurisdiction, no any jurisdiction anywhere on the planet. You are a counterfeit. You are a self-styled King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and you are Satan's vicar. And your mission in the world is to deceive the whole world, which you have done, but no longer. We're going to hold to God's law, not Roman Catholic canon law. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Liberty would finally really come to America, the liberty whereby Christ hath made us free. But we live in a phony freedom in this country. We live in tyranny in the name of freedom. You talk about deceived. Deceived doesn't even capture the level of deception. All right, Martin's assignment would be to pursue good relations and economic opportunities for the United States, not to interfere in the internal affairs of the Papal States. Rome can touch us, but we can't touch her. See, there's the separation of church and state, really how it exists between the papacy and the governments of the world, just like I described earlier. Okay, nonetheless, the charge was expected to let the Pope understand where the United States stood. As Secretary Buchanan wrote to Martin, quote, "The American people can never be indifferent to the cause of constitutional freedom and liberal reform in any portion of the world," unquote. Martin responded from Paris on May 1st, 1848. He would indeed avoid religious issues and direct interference. He assured the Secretary of State, while informing the Pope of the moral sympathies of Americans. The moral sympathies of Americans. Quote, "I am fully aware of the interest which is felt by the President and the people of the United States in the efforts of the present Pope to introduce wise and judicious reforms in a country over which Providence," listen, Providence with a capital P, in other words, God has called him to rule, unquote. Okay, the United States, in the efforts to present Pope to introduce wise and judicious reforms in the country over which God has called him to rule. Did God call the Pope to rule over anybody? Anybody? Martin shared with Buchanan his own high hopes for Pope Pius IX, who appeared, quote, "resolved to invigorate that ancient establishment," that is the Roman Catholic Church, "that ancient establishment with the animating principle of liberty," unquote. You see, that's a very poignant quote, because liberty has never been in the vocabulary of the papacy or the Roman Catholic Church, except in terms of one's liberty to be Roman Catholic. Roman Catholic canon law, as I said before, says all rights, all liberties come from the Pope. And what he giveth, he may taketh away. The papacy is the judge of every man, and no man may judge him. That's Roman Catholicism. And you were afraid a Muslim might rule the world. Even as Jacob Martin was writing to Secretary Buchanan, the Pope's popularity in Italy was diminishing rapidly, along with the perception that Pius IX was committed to the principle of liberty. By the time Martin arrived in Rome to assume his duties 3 months later, the hero of 1847, Pope Pius IX, was the villain of 1848. The sudden shift in the Pope's fortunes and intentions must rank as one of the quickest turnabouts in modern world history. The Pope's going to do about face now. Okay? The Jesuits have gotten to him, and he's going to return to Tridentine, that is, the Council of Trent, Counter-Reformation Pope. All right. No liberty. Now that's out. Okay, I've made a mistake, or you've misinterpreted what I've said. We're going back to traditional Roman Catholicism. It says Pius IX was caught up in the historical currents which converged into a political tsunami that swept across much of the world in 1848. In France, The king abdicated and the streets of Paris filled with protests. A flashback to 1789. Revolutions simultaneously broke out in Budapest and Warsaw over much of Austria, where the conservative Prince Metternich was driven out of power, and in large parts of Germany. Meanwhile, that same fateful year, a young German named Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto. Did anybody ever tell you the secret? Karl Marx was trained in a Jesuit university? That's right. Karl Marx published the Communist Manifesto. Did you know, we've already covered that the Jesuits created the form of government we now know as Republican or democracy, democratics. You know, I mentioned Bellarmine and Suarez and one other one whose name escapes me. The Jesuits also created the form of government known as communism. All forms of government are creations of the monks in the Roman Catholic Church. You see, the aim of the Roman Catholic Church is to eventually rule the world. The papacy must rule the world, or he can't fulfill his prophetic role. So, which form of government would work best? Well, let's have 3 or 4 in the world all at the same time and pit them all against one another to battle. And then when the smoke clears, the world will be so sick and tired of war, so destitute of war, they'll be ready to accept me as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that's just exactly what's happened. That's why the Jesuits created fascism. The Jesuits created democracy. The Jesuits created communism. And that's why the Bible talks about wars, and rumors of wars. It preaches peace when there is no peace. And there will be no peace. Listen, the Bible says there will be no peace until the Prince of Peace comes. And let me tell you a secret that you'll never hear in your church or anywhere else. The Pope is not the Prince of Peace. Jesus Christ, the true Messiah, is the Prince of Peace. And until Jesus Christ sets up his kingdom on this earth, there will be no peace. And we'll be continually beating our plowshares into weaponry, spears, until Christ comes. And then he will end all wars. And then we'll beat those weapons, those spears, back into pruning hooks. The man of sin is a man of war. He uses war and the contention between the nations as a dynamic to move his locomotive to the chief head of state in the world. Without war, without varying governments throughout the world, the papacy and the Jesuits are unable to pit one nation against another. There's no energy. There's no, BTUs to keep the papal engine running. And that's why we're destined for war until Christ comes. That is, of course, unless Protestant America gets a second birth and we can educate the rest of the people in this country with God's help. No, it's prophesied to go the way of Baal. This whole world is going to go the way of Baal, and the high priest of Baal in Rome, and only then will Christ's judgment descend. And then, after the enemy has been destroyed, will peace reign in the world. He says among the loudest stirrings in 1848 were those heard in Italy, where the Risorgimento, that is the resurgence, exploded in a series of revolts and riots. The goal of the Risorgimento movement under the leadership of Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi were Italian nationalism and democratic reform. Achieving these meant, first, kicking the Austrians, that is the Tridentine conservative Roman Catholics, out of northern Italy, where they ruled for 50 years, and second, unifying the dozens of independent Italian states under a single republican government. Metternich's warning about liberal popes now came due, because Pius had allowed himself to be cast as a reformer. The Italian revolutionaries naturally assumed that he was in sympathy with their goals. They expected him to cheer the unification movement and to throw his weight into the fight against Austria, ignoring the fact that Pius had done little to support these expectations. Simply by appearing sympathetic, he raised the hopes of reformers. You know who appeared to be sympathetic but wasn't? The popes that ruled over Vatican Council II. They appeared to be sympathetic to their separated brethren, the Protestants. Now we're going back to counter-Reformation Rome.